If consumers hate junk fees so much, why do companies, large and small, increasingly impose them? The answer is, unsurprisingly, because they are a substantial profit center. Airlines are also poster children for junk fees. Globally, revenue from junk fees, ancillary fees in airline speak, brought in $102.8 billion in 2022. To put this in perspective, junk fees last year made up 15% of global airline revenues, compared to 6% only 10 years ago.
Over $100 billion transferred from our pockets, if we want to travel, to the shareholder class. That's a lot of money.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can't stick to your story if you think it flies. But I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 280th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And if this is your first time checking out Congressional Dish, thanks. This is an interesting time to be checking out a new podcast about Congress. I mean, not that this podcast is new. This has been around for over a decade. But if it's new to you, this is an interesting time to give it a try, considering Congress hasn't done anything the entire summer. Because I'm recording this in the middle of Congress's 6-week vacation. You know, you wonder why people go into Congress and don't leave until they die. And maybe it's because it's the only profession in the United States where you get 6 weeks off for the summer and 2 weeks off for Easter and 3 to 4 weeks off for Christmas. I mean, these people, they're hardly ever at work. And they really should be at work because the government needs to be funded by the end of September. I'm recording this on September 1st. They have completed exactly 0 of the 12 government funding bills. And so we are barreling towards a government shutdown, and yet they're still on vacay. And they're going to remain on vacation until September 12th, which is well after the Labor Day holiday. So this Congress just sucks. This is honestly the worst one I've ever seen. And I've been doing this now for, I think this is my 6th or 7th Congress. It's pretty bad. And so because Congress has decided that they just don't work anymore, I decided to go back into the archive and watch some congressional hearings that have a direct effect on my life and my financial situation. Because I left Austin, Texas, where my husband and I were digital nomads. So we travel most of the year, but we've decided to spend a few months every year in Austin, Texas. And we left Austin at the beginning of May, and we've been traveling ever since. And I've got to tell you that so many hours of my summer have been spent dealing with corporate fees. Specifically, reducing a hotel pet fee of over $3,800 and watching my monthly rent steadily increase now that I'm in the process of renting an apartment for my upcoming 6-month snowbird stay back in Austin, Texas. And so what I did for this episode, and for my own general knowledge, was that I watched some recent congressional hearings about so-called junk fees to see what Congress is being told, because these witnesses that Congress calls to testify, they're generally experts, and listening to them is a great way to know about what problems we have in America, and in this particular instance, about tricky fees before we get tricked into them. And I also wanted to know if Congress has any plans to do anything about deceptive but profitable corporate trickery, which is costing all of us time, money, or both. And so in today's episode, I'm going to highlight testimony to Congress that will hopefully help you be prepared for fees while you're shopping for items and services. And I'm going to show you evidence that there could be a path in Congress to improving our so-called junk fee situation. And so for this episode, you're going to hear sound clips from 2 hearings that have happened in the Senate this year, which is the part of Congress that's currently controlled by the Democrats. These 2 hearings took place, the first one was on June 8th, and that was in the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation Subcommittee on Consumer Protection, Product Safety, and Data Security. And then the other one took place on July 26th in the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Subcommittee on Financial Institutions and Consumer Protection. Now, in order to give you this episode, which I'm guessing is only going to be about an hour, these clips came from approximately 5 hours of hearings. And so if you want to watch these hearings in full, you can go ahead and go to the show notes for this episode where I give you the links to the full hearings. But I'm also giving you the timestamps and transcripts of all of these clips so you can find them easily and listen to them in context. I also did way more research than what you're going to hear in this episode. This episode was difficult for me to produce because I ended up cutting a lot. But if you want to really dive into this subject, go and check out the show notes because every document we came across, every article, all of the stuff that we looked at to produce this episode, it's all going to be there for you so that you can do your own research. And of course, this takes work. A lot of podcasters and newscasters and journalists in general don't bother to tell you where they get their information from. But in my opinion, trust is earned, and the show notes are how I earn your trust. And if you appreciate this work, and if you appreciate that you're going to hear all of this without any ads, I think it's important for you to know that everything I'm telling you is because I think it to be true, as opposed to telling you things because some company is paying me to tell you things. And so I don't take any ads on this show. If you appreciate an ad-free show that earns your trust, please contribute to Congressional Dish using any payment method that works for you. And they're all listed on the Support the Show page on congressionaldish.com. If you want to contribute per episode, we do have a Patreon that is a per episode format, and there is bonus content on there. I know it's been a while since I've done some bonus content. It's been a very busy summer, and I spent a good chunk of August not feeling well, but I am going to have some Patreon stuff coming up for you, and we'll talk about that at the end of the episode. But then if you just want to support the show, we also accept PayPals and Venmos and Zells and Cash Apps and paper checks and Chipotle gift cards and Bitcoin and really anything you want to send. However you want to pay for this show, it works for me. The only thing that feels unfair is when you pay zero. So thank you to everyone who's helped me produce this show and keep it going for all these years. I couldn't do it without you. Okay, so now let's get into the junk fees hearings. And in Congress, they keep calling these things junk fees, but I tend to call them corporate fees, and I'm probably going to be using those labels interchangeably here. But in Congress, corporate fees are being discussed with this catch-all label of junk fees. And so here's Senator John Hickenlooper of Colorado attempting to define what they mean when they're talking about junk fees in Congress.
Simply put, these are fees that are disclosed to a consumer midway through or at the end of a transaction, or they're fees that serve no tangible purpose for a consumer, like a processing fee, and that they are mandatory or unavoidable.
But the problem is that his definition is not official because there is no official definition of junk fees. So here's Todd Zawitke. He is a law professor at George Mason University, and here he is testifying on June 8th.
Junk fees is a meaningless term, but it's worse than meaningless. It's actually pernicious, which is that by sort of using this blanket conclusory label, it obscures the complexity of this, the difference between drip pricing, risk-based pricing, multi-part pricing, partition pricing, and that sort of thing. And it kind of sweeps into one bucket things that are legitimate, things that aren't, things that might be partially legitimate.
And so just like how the definition of junk fees, that label is kind of all over the place, so were the hearings about these fees. And so the term is clearly too broad because the hearing discussed fees in so many business sectors and so many different kinds of fees. But we were talking about fees that are being charged by hotels and by rental housing companies and banks and airlines and ticketing in general. And there were discussions of lots of different kinds of problematic pricing schemes. So, for example, here's Vicki Morwitz. She is a business professor from Columbia Business School, and here she is explaining one kind of common pricing practice.
My co-authors and I define partition pricing as a strategy where firms decide to divide a product's price into two or more mandatory parts, a base price for the main product and one or more mandatory surcharges, rather than charging a single all-inclusive price. For example, many hotels assess a mandatory fee on top of the daily room rate. These are sometimes called resort fees or facility fees or destination fees and can range from $20 to over $50 a night. And many rental car agencies assess several mandatory fees on top of the daily rental rate, such as concession recovery fees, customer facility fees, energy recovery fees, and vehicle licensing fees. In general, what research on partition pricing has shown is that when firms separate out mandatory surcharges, consumers tend to underestimate the total price they'll have to pay, and they're often more likely to complete the purchase.
And then here's a similar but yet different kind of deceptive pricing practice.
With drip pricing, firms advertise only part of a product's price up front and reveal other charges later as shoppers go through the buying process. Dripped fees can be mandatory or can be for optional items, but for today's testimony, I'll focus on the dripping of mandatory surcharges. Drip pricing is commonly used in industries like the cable TV and the ticketing industries. When a consumer shops for a TV internet bundle from a cable television provider, they may first see an attractive base price offer for the bundle, but later learn there are also broadcast TV fees, set-top box fees, regional sports fees, and TV connection fees that raise the price considerably. And a consumer shopping for a ticket for a live event like a concert, a play, or a baseball game typically first sees the price for different seats in the venue. After selecting a seat, as the consumer clicks through more web pages, they may come to learn there's also a mandatory booking fee, ticketing fee, venue fee, and delivery fee, even when the tickets are delivered electronically. Eventually, they see a total price that may be much higher than the first price they saw, and they may be under time pressure to complete the purchase, as there might be a countdown clock that indicates they have to complete their purchase in just a few minutes, or they may be told there's only 2 seats left at that price. What research has shown is that when surcharges are dripped, consumers end up being more likely to buy a product that appears cheaper up front based only on the base price, but that's more expensive in total given the drip fees. Consumers also tend to buy more expensive products than they otherwise would are dripped, such as a seat closer to the stage for a live event.
And she focused a lot of her testimony on ticketing, but I'm actually dealing with some drip pricing right now in my quest to rent a short-term apartment. Because Joe and I are, like I said before, going back to Austin for 6 months so that I can record live with my We're Not Wrong boys and play beach volleyball with my friends most nights of the week before the heat in Texas becomes inhospitable to humans again. But for the apartment that we're in the process of renting, there was a price that was advertised for my exact apartment. But then, after we paid a non-refundable $530 to apply for the apartment, we found out that 1, the apartment is going to be $301 per month more expensive because we want a 6-month lease instead of a full year. 2, there's a $30 per month pet fee if our dog Abby wants to live with us. And there's a $400 non-refundable pet fee on top of that pet rent. And 3, it's going to cost a minimum of $130 per month to have a parking space in Texas, where public transportation barely exists. Which means that so far, because I'm just in the middle of this leasing process, our apartment is going to be $527 per month, more than we would reasonably expect it to be based on what was published on the company's website before and during the application process. But what are we going to do? Switch buildings? I already paid a non-refundable $530 to get us approved for this one. And so I could feel stuck with this building unless I wanted to just burn that $530. But in my personal situation, I'm sticking with my apartment because I used to be a corporate landlord. And so the hidden fees were not a surprise to me, although the total is. $527 in extra monthly fees before utilities is pretty high. And it's worse than what I used to have to charge people, because my soulless corporate parent company made us charge a $30 per person non-refundable application fee, and we would hit pet owners with a $50 a month in pet rent charge. Oh, and this one was insane. Our apartments also didn't come with refrigerators, and so people would have to pay $50 a month to rent one from us. That one always felt like a scam. But there was no $310 fee for nothing required just to apply, and parking was, of course, included. But I personally don't feel stuck in this situation because when applying, I knew that the published price for that apartment would be a lowball because of my experience on the other side of the rental desk. And I'm still thrilled about the apartment that I'm going to be spending this winter in, and so this isn't like a woe is me story. But how many people move as often as I do or have insider information about corporate apartment rentals and how these companies are basically a festival of fees? Because I'm telling you, the entire industry preys on customers with fees. So here's Sally Greenberg. She's the Chief Executive Officer of National Consumers League, testifying about this on June 8th.
Renters, for example, tend to have lower incomes than those who own their homes. These consumers are also some of the most preyed upon by abusive junk fees. A 2022 survey conducted by consumer and housing advocates found that 89% of landlords impose rental application fees. Nearly as many renters paid excessive late fees, and they also get hit with utility, administrative, convenience, insurance, and notice fees.
And companies that charge fees like this are nationwide. So I was a corporate landlord in California, and the company I worked for owns large apartment complexes in 8 states. I've also been a renter in corporate housing in California, Massachusetts, and Texas, and my monthly rent was higher than advertised every single time. And Lindsay Siegel is the director of housing advocacy at the Atlanta Legal Aid Society in Atlanta, Georgia. And you'll hear her testimony in a second. But the point I'm making here is that blue state, red state doesn't matter. Rental fee horror stories all have similar themes.
My name is Lindsay Siegel, and I'm the Director of Housing Advocacy at Atlanta Legal Aid, which provides free civil legal services to families with low incomes in the metro Atlanta area. Today, I will focus on the rental housing market and how predatory and hidden rental fees gouge families living in poverty and make their rent even more unaffordable than it already is. Ms. Dixon is a single mother who found an online listing for an apartment in the fall of 2020. The advertisement said it rented for $1,400 per month. It did not list any other monthly fees she would be required to pay. She applied and paid $525 through the landlord's online portal, which covered her $50 application fee, a $175 move-in fee, and a $300 screening fee, all of which were non-refundable. She was not able to see the lease or the apartment she'd be renting, but she knew if she did not pay sight unseen, she would lose the apartment. And when her application was approved a few weeks later, the landlord charged her another $200 approval fee. She finally received and signed a copy of her lease just 2 days before she was slated to move in. It was 50 pages long and contained 8 different addenda. She had expected to pay her rent and for water. She didn't expect to be responsible for a package locker fee, a trash removal fee, a separate valet trash fee, a pest control fee, a technology package fee, an insurance fee, and a credit reporting fee. When the fees added up, $83 had been tacked on to her monthly rent. And to make matters worse, Ms. Dixon's landlord did not accept the rent by cash, check, or money order. When she paid through the landlord's online portal, she was charged another $72 per payment convenience fee. The low-income renters Atlanta Legal Aid represents have an extreme power imbalance with their landlords. The high demand for rental housing, especially at the more affordable end of the market, makes some landlords believe they can easily get away with unfair and deceptive lease terms and rental practices. The bait and switch Ms. Dixon experienced, where the landlord advertised the rent as one price, only to raise it much higher with junk fees after she had spent hundreds of dollars up front, is a far too common practice of many investor landlords in the Atlanta area. Low-income renters like Ms. Dixon become trapped. She couldn't afford to walk away from a predatory lease 2 days before she was supposed to move in, even if she realized it would be unaffordable. Of particular concern are the use of high application fees. They often far exceed the cost of running a report, and most renters have to pay them several times before finding a home to rent. We've heard reports that some institutional landlords even collect application fees after they've found a renter for an available home.
I just paid $530 for my husband and I to apply to rent our apartment. And there is no way in hell that it costs that much to run 2 credit reports and maybe call some of our references. Because I was an award-winning corporate landlord for a few years. I hated the job, but I was very good at it. And we almost never called references. If the credit report was good enough and you could prove your income, that's what got you approved. And so there's no way to justify $530 for an application process, even if you account for labor, because approving an application almost never took more than 30 minutes. And you'll notice that when I'm talking about this here, that I'm picking on corporate landlords, not someone who owns, the house that's next door and rents that out. Corporate landlords in particular are a problem. And here's Lindsay Siegel, Director of Housing Advocacy, again from Atlanta Legal Aid Society, explaining why.
Tenants living in Atlanta have a very hard time finding a rental, finding a home that's not owned by a corporate landlord at this point. They have bought up many properties in the Atlanta area, and they always seem to be working in lockstep, so that once one institutional landlord is charging a certain kind of fee, then another one tends to charge it as well. Just one example of this is the proliferation of landlords charging for insurance fees. And often tenants will think that these are renter's insurance because they're often called renter's insurance. But it's not like traditional renter's insurance that protects the renter and their property if it's destroyed. What it does is protect the landlord and doesn't really provide a benefit to tenants at all. And we've seen that proliferate with investor landlords in particular.
Investor landlords do not exist to provide safe and affordable homes. They exist to pass out profits to shareholders, to funnel wealth via the stock market to the top 10% of wealth holders in America who hold 89% of all U.S. stocks. This wealth redistribution goes from our pockets to their profits to shareholders' bank accounts. And I think of that every time I pay a fee that I think is unreasonable, but I can't figure out how to get out of. So I think about it a lot. Because when I'm not living in corporate apartments, I'm living in hotels. And there were quite a few hours this summer that I spent not working on this show and enjoying my life and travels, but discussing pet fees with Hyatt employees. So this summer, I lived in a wonderful, brand new Hyatt Regency. It was the Hyatt Regency Insurgentes in Mexico City. And I loved this hotel so much that when I said goodbye to the staff on the last day, I fully cried. They were the actual best. I miss seeing these people every day. And the hotel itself, the rooms were large and comfortable with gorgeous views. The food was delicious. We got full dinners in addition to our full breakfasts. We got full dinners in their club lounge every night. And that club lounge, by the way, was about 20 floors up and had fabulous views of Mexico City and the El Popo volcano, which we saw burp up volcano stuff 3 times while we were there. It was super cool. I loved everything about this hotel after we negotiated a reasonable pet fee. Because this hotel wasn't even open yet when I reserved our room, and so the website was incomplete when I first booked my deeply discounted room. But a few days before we left for Mexico City, I opened the Hyatt's website to double check for a pet fee, and they had added one. And heart palpitations immediately ensued. I immediately fired off an email to the property manager at the Hyatt Regency Insurgentes, telling them that they must have made a mistake on the pet fee because, quoting from my email to the hotel, quote, "Right now, the website says that the pet fee is $56 per night, plus a $75 fee, plus another $250 cleaning fee. For our 63-night stay, the total pet fee would be $3,853 to have our dog with us, which is insane," unquote. $3,853 to have our 8-pound dog who doesn't shed with us in a pet-friendly hotel. And that pet fee was listed nowhere in the Hyatt app, which is where I do most of my bookings. And it's where I do most of my accounting as well. In fact, no pet fees are ever listed in the Hyatt app, not in the hotel details or in the billing estimations. Nowhere, at least in my experience as of August 2023, and I've been on the road now for 3 years. To find the Hyatt pet fees, you have to go to the individual hotel's website and find the section about pets, where the vast majority of the time for Hyatt, I find pet fees between $75 and $150 per stay. But sometimes the pet fees are different, wildly different. And here's a quick pet-owning digital nomad tip for you. You can also look up the pet fees for the hotels on Expedia/hotels.com/Travelocity/Hotwire/Orbitz, which, by the way, are all the same company now, in a prime example of how we only have the illusion of choice in this corporatocracy here in America. But oftentimes, the fees for each hotel are easier to find on the Expedia subsidiaries' websites. But more important, I check the fees as listed by Expedia subsidiaries because sometimes the pet fees are different from the Hyatt hotel website. And if the pet fee is lower on the Expedia-owned websites, I print the page showing the pet fee and show the front desk when I check in. And I have found that whoever's working at the front desk has always honored the price that I show them from my stack of papers. I'm guessing because no front desk wants to battle with someone who looks organized. But back to the Mexico City Hyatt pet fees. $3,853 is obviously obscene, and it totally changes the price per night when compared to the other Hyatts in the area. And by the way, the reason that I'm focusing on Hyatts here is that one of the ways that I'm able to fund a life on the road and not go broke is that I've achieved status with both Hyatt and Marriott from all of my travels last year. And that gets you stuff like room upgrades and free breakfasts. Like I said, it was free dinners too in Mexico City. There's all kinds of perks that make this much more affordable. So that's why we were focusing on Hyatts, because I have got to tell you, as a Hyatt globalist, it is the best. We've stopped actually working on getting the Marriott status because we found it to be essentially useless. But Hyatt's is amazing. And so when we went to Mexico City, we wanted to stay in a Hyatt. And there were 3 total Hyatt options for us. And so when we looked at the pet fees, we found that one of the other Hyatts was charging $30 in pet rent per night, which for 63 days would have been $1,890, which is still insane. But then the third Hyatt charges only a single $100 pet fee. And so obviously that range of pet fees is quite significant. And so, for example, if all 3 Mexico City Hyatts were charging $100 per night, the true cost for me would have actually been $161 per night at my hotel, $130 per night at the one with the $30 pet rent, and $102 per night at the one with the reasonable pet fee. And that is a huge difference, which is totally hidden unless you know to do the research that I do and add it up yourself on the side, because there is nowhere online where you can see a total, including pet fees and parking. But in regards to hotels, I have noticed some changes for the better lately, because just as discovering pet fees before you arrive is currently a game of hide and go seek, we also used to have to play hide and go seek for resort and or destination fees as well. But I've noticed that Marriott now has an option to see pricing, including all taxes and fees. And Hyatt is now just automatically including destination/resort fees in the total billing estimate. And I am naive enough to have been pleasantly surprised by the sudden display of morality by Marriott and Hyatt. But as it turns out, the change of behavior appears to be because of a lawsuit settlement. Here's Michelle Henry. She's the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, testifying to the Senate on July 26th.
In 2021, we announced a landmark junk fee settlement with Marriott International. For many years, travelers had been misled by the published rates offered by hotels for a night stay, only later to be hit with the mandatory resort fees when they were checking in. Thanks to our settlement, Marriott now has a policy in place to be upfront and transparent in the disclosure of mandatory fees, including resort fees, as part of the total price of a hotel stay, allowing consumers to compare total costs for hotels and find the one that is the best fit for them. Marriott was the first hotel chain to formally commit to the upfront disclosure of resort fees as part of the initial advertised price. We hope others will follow.
So I should have known that they wouldn't have made those fees obvious on their own. Because if they were doing this to help the customer, why wouldn't they add an option to include parking and pet fees in those totals? And by the way, when it comes to the Hyatt Regency Insurgentes in Mexico City, I was able to, after lots of emails back and forth and from the hotel staff falling in love with my dog, I was able to get the pet fee down to $150 flat. And that was it. So it does make sense if you catch these fees in advance to bring them up very nicely beforehand, because a lot of times the managers are empowered to change them if they want to. And while I was at that hotel, I met pretty much everyone that worked there, including the general manager, and read him the riot act on the pet fees. And so I am hopeful that that hotel is going to change their fee, because I pointed out that anyone who catches that is not going to pick their hotel over the others. But anyway, Like I said, when it comes to the mandatory fees, things have gotten better on the Marriott and Hyatt websites, which are the only ones that I'm all that familiar with. And knowing that lawsuits by states' attorneys general made the difference here, I just feel like that's a page to add to the How to Fight Corporate Fees playbook. It's a good thing to keep in mind. Because it's not just hotels that have had to settle lawsuits about unreasonable fees. So here's Michelle Henry again, the Attorney General of Pennsylvania.
We also had a significant junk fee settlement in 2018 with Wells Fargo. This settlement stemmed from Wells charging its auto finance customers millions in junk fees. Despite evidence that many customers already had the required car insurance, Wells improperly charged more than 2 million accounts for forced place insurance. To resolve the multi-state action, Wells agreed to pay states $575 million.
And the banks are being charged for other fees by the states right now. Here's Michelle Henry again.
In the consumer finance space, we recently filed a multi-state lawsuit against Mariner Finance, a Wall Street private equity-owned installment lender. Our lawsuit alleges that Mariner charged consumers junk fees for hidden add-on products that consumers either did not know about or did not agree to buy. These hidden add-on products, such as credit insurance and auto clubs, are typically low or no value products. Consumers left Mariner believing that they had entered into an agreement to borrow and repay over time a certain amount of money. In reality, because of these hidden junk fees, Mariner added hundreds to thousands of dollars to the total amount a consumer owned. The cost of the junk fees is staggering. For a random sample of loans originated in Pennsylvania in December of 2020, Mariner charged each consumer an average of $1,085 in junk fees for an average of $3,394 in cash borrowed.
Her testimony was only at the end of July, and so that lawsuit has not concluded, and no settlement has caused any positive changes that I know of. But this is good to know. It's an excellent reminder to check every line of documents that we sign with banks, because if we see a fee that doesn't look like it should be there, or like it's for a product that is useless to you that you never asked for, you might very well be right. And of course, as we examined in detail in episode 267, the monopoly powers of Live Nation Ticketmaster, we also know that attending almost any live event in the United States will almost inevitably lead you to having to pay all kinds of unjustifiable fees. And because we discussed the ticketing space in such depth already this year, I'm going to skip a lot of the ticketing discussion. It was a frequent topic in these hearings. But I did find this bit of information about ticketing to be pretty mind-blowing. Here's Sally Greenberg, the Chief Executive Officer of the National Consumers League.
Primary and secondary market ticketing companies charge service fees, order processing fees, delivery fees, and other charges that increase ticket prices on average 27% for the primary market and 31% for the secondary market.
That is a significant difference in pricing. And so I'm going to use that when looking to buy tickets by basically adding 30% in my head to the published price as I shop to gauge if I can really afford to go to that event. I feel like knowing that 30%-ish statistic in extra fees is going to save me a lot of time searching for true prices. And regardless of what industry was being discussed, a search for true prices was a recurring theme. Here's Michelle Henry, the Attorney General of Pennsylvania.
You know, the reality is a lot of times consumers get misled. So they're looking on the internet, they're trying to do due diligence and look for the best price, whether it's for a hotel, a vacation, and they're examining it and they get led to a certain area, a certain website, thinking that's the best price. And they go down this rabbit hole where they have no idea at the end of it that the price they thought they were going to pay for a hotel stay with their family is actually far larger because of fees that they weren't prepared or were not properly advised of. And at that point, they're so far in or they never discover it. So no, I don't think they understand exactly what to be aware of. We're trying to do our best to educate, but far more work needs to be done. And I applaud this committee for working on it.
And while the focus so far has been on us customers, being hurt by deceptive and hard to find fees, it's not just customers who are getting hurt by this. Here's Sally Greenberg, the Chief Executive Officer of the National Consumers League.
Junk fees themselves are anti-competitive. They make comparing prices more difficult, distorting well-functioning marketplaces. Honest entrepreneurs who invest in their businesses, innovate, and strive to create better value for their customers lose business. Action to address the consumer and competitive harm created by junk fees is urgently needed.
And Vicki Morwitz, who is the professor of business at Columbia Business School, she expanded on how hidden fees hurt businesses.
When a larger firm, or really any firm, uses hidden fees or surcharges, it doesn't only hurt consumers, but it hurts well-intentioned, honest competitors like many of our country's small businesses that you're talking about. So when a larger firm makes salient a lower base price and only puts in the small print or only reveals at the end of the shopping process that there are additional mandatory fees, their product offerings may appear, at least at first, to be cheaper than those of, say, a small business, an honest competitor who uses all-inclusive prices, whose prices, at least at first, then will appear more expensive, even if they're actually cheaper in total when the hidden fees of the large firm are added in. Now, research shows this is going to lead consumers to be more likely to even first consider the products and services of the larger firm who uses hidden surcharges because their products seem cheaper. In other words, their supposed low prices draw consumers in. But then, having first considered their products, consumers will also be more likely to stick with that firm and ultimately purchase their products, even when they're more expensive in total with the fees. So these hidden fees, they don't only hurt consumers by leading them to make purchases that are against their own self-interest, but it also hurts honest competitors who are using transparent pricing practices.
And there is a totally understandable reason that these companies keep pricing this way, pissing off their customers and distorting markets. Here's Sally Greenberg, the CEO of the National Consumers League.
If consumers hate junk fees so much, why do companies, large and small, increasingly impose them? The answer is, unsurprisingly, because they are a substantial profit center.
And so, for example, let's take a look at the airlines and how much they profit off of fees. Here's Sally Greenberg, the CEO of the National Consumers League.
Airlines are also poster children for junk fees. Globally, revenue from junk fees, ancillary fees in airline speak, brought in $102.8 billion in 2022. To put this in perspective, junk fees last year made up 15% of global airline revenues, compared to 6% only 10 years ago.
Over $100 billion transferred from our pockets, if we want to travel, to the shareholder class. That's a lot of money for no reason. And while we're on the subject of the airlines, here's something, even as a frequent, often full-time traveler, that I didn't know. Here's Sally Greenberg, the CEO of the National Consumers League.
We certainly support the Good Jobs for Airports Act. I think many consumers had no idea that a lot of these workers were not making minimum wage, were relying on tips. And many people who use the wheelchairs and baggage, use the baggage, the curbside baggage services, did not know that people were living on tipped wages, and many people don't tip, as some of us who've been tipped workers know. Tipping is very very up and down, and certainly not a reliable source of income.
And I feel so awful, because I've always assumed that the people who check bags curbside or do wheelchair assists were paid just like any other airport or airline employee. Because Joe and I have both had wheelchair assistants at airports. Me, because of a drunken ankle injury like 15 years ago, and Joe because of an unfortunately deep hole in a beach volleyball court just a few months ago. But we didn't tip either of our wheelchair assistants because I didn't know that was a thing that we were supposed to do, and now I feel terrible. And so FYI, tip your wheelchair attendants and curbside bag handlers. And I'm going to voice support right now for the Good Jobs for Airports Act. It's a bill written by Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts in the Senate and Representative Jesus Garcia in the House, which would prevent airports from getting federal tax money unless pretty much all the employees that work at airports are paid at least $15 an hour or the state's minimum wage, whichever is higher. And we're going to have to voice support to make that bill happen because it's been introduced in at least the last 2 congressional sessions, and it hasn't moved at all. And because while 15 Democrats and 1 independent have co-sponsored the bill in the Senate, and 88 Democrats have co-sponsored the House version, not a single Republican has put their support behind these bills that would pay airport workers fairly. Which I do think speaks a lot when it comes to which party is even attempting to be the party of the working class in terms of their legislative behavior. Because f their words. It matters what you do with your power, not what you say you're going to do. And unfortunately, it does seem pretty clear that legislation on the federal level is needed. And here's why. Here's Michelle Henry, the Attorney General of Pennsylvania.
We often see things bleed over state lines and boundaries, as you are well aware. And so it's important that we work together to enforce these matters.
And some in Congress seem to be considering an expansion of authorities of federal regulators as a solution to all of this. So, for example, here's Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia. He's a Democrat, speaking to Michelle Henry, Attorney General of Pennsylvania.
If more federal agencies had the authority to address these hidden fees, how would that affect your office's capacity?
It would help tremendously.
Thank you so very much.
But I think expanding authorities for federal agencies is going to be tough, based on the comments of some of the Republicans, actually all of the Republicans in these hearings. So, for example, here's Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee.
I'm not hearing from Tennesseans about junk fees. They're just not talking about, they are talking about real economic harm. And I think for some, it's been kind of perplexing that we would focus on this issue. I even had one Tennessean say, well, what exactly is a junk fee? And what are the economic harms that come to people for fees for discretionary services? The way I look at this issue and the way many Tennesseans look at it is this is another way for the FTC, the CFPB, DOT, and all these regulators to clamp down on businesses and try to micromanage businesses.
The FTC is the Federal Trade Commission. The CFPB is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The DOT is the Department of Transportation. All of them basically would be the fee police with all of these different industries charging these hidden fees. And so basically, Marsha Blackburn and others like her see rules that protect customers from deceptive fees as micromanaging business. Because God forbid a business that scams its customers and distorts markets against honest businesses be micromanaged. But the thing is, she's not alone in this idea that businesses aren't doing anything wrong and that the regulators are the villains. And so here's the witness who I'm fairly certain was the one picked by the Republicans, since only Republicans wanted to talk to him. But this is Brian Johnson, the managing director of Potomac Global Partners. So basically, this guy advises corporations on how to make money for a living. And before that gig, during the years that the Trump administration was in charge of it, he worked at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau under notorious government hater Mick Mulvaney. And here's what Brian Johnson was telling Congress about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's efforts to police deceptive fees.
The agency has publicly hectored companies about deposit account fees and used the implied threat of investigation to induce such companies to abandon these legal fees. Further, in addressing other fees, the CFPB appears to have violated its own regulations and laws governing how agencies proffer rules by disguising interpretive rules as policy statements in bulletins and issuing circulars that function as legislative rules. In another instance, under the guise of interpretation, the CFPB read a word into a statute to achieve its desired policy outcome. In still another, the agency treats the rulemaking process as a foregone conclusion, acting as though a still proposed rule has already taken effect, signaling that the agency has no interest in considering public comments, establishing an adequate evidentiary basis to support its conclusions, or considering potential changes to improve the rule. These examples demonstrate an abuse of power and the agency's disregard for process and the limits placed on it. Moreover, the CFPB's behavior subverts the authority of Congress to oversee the agency and legislate the legality of fees in our financial marketplace. Simply put, it's not playing by the rules.
Now, this guy didn't give any specifics about any of that he said, and I don't care to get into the details because, quite frankly, I don't trust this man. But the point is that the Republicans and their witness routinely framed the federal fee police as the bad guys. And so the idea of empowering the CFPB or the FTC or any other federal agency to police deceptive fees, I just don't think it's a possibility as long as Republicans are empowered in Congress. And here's why. Here's Senator Tom Tillis, a Republican of North Carolina.
And I, for one, do not think that the regulators who have demonstrated pushing the boundaries of their authority, giving them more authority, is a good idea if we're coming up with a real bipartisan sustainable solution.
And I do feel like I have to note that Tom Tillis made it pretty clear who he was speaking for in the hearing.
I'd like to submit for the record a letter from the Consumer Bankers Association on the subject.
So, the corporations that are profiting from hidden fees, they are well represented in this Congress. And so I don't think pushing for authorities for federal agencies is a worthwhile use of our time in this Congress, even if fees being applied over state lines is a problem, and even if states' attorneys general want the feds empowered to crack down on corporate deception. But empowering the federal agencies might not be the best way to reduce deceptive fees anyway. On this, Tom Tillis has a point.
The problem we have here, too, when we transfer power out of Congress to another branch, is that it changes every 4 years or so. So you may be thrilled with a regulatory regimen that comes out from the CFPB today, but because of the way they behaved, it'd be one of the first things I would work to repeal if the administration changed and withdraw it.
Mick Mulvaney was put in charge of the CFPB by a corrupt corporate titan turned president, Donald Trump. Mick Mulvaney was a true believer in the idea that the private sector can and should do everything, and that corporations should almost never be subject to any kind of policing. Mick Mulvaney was an extremist in this regard and served as a fox in the henhouse by being put in charge of an agency designed to police corporations during the Trump years. And so, you can have Frodo hand the ring of power to the CFPB, but what use is power if those who have it refuse to use it, which is often the case during Republican administrations. And so instead of focusing on empowering the feds, I think this is the heart of the issue as identified by Michelle Henry, Attorney General of Pennsylvania.
In the end, what we are fighting here for is basic fairness and transparency. When consumers are shopping online or in person, they deserve to understand what a loan, a house, or a vacation will cost, and exactly what key terms they're agreeing to. At the same time, all businesses deserve to compete on an even playing field, where the price is the price with no hidden surprise fees.
And here's Vicki Morwitz. She is the professor of business at the Columbia Business School. And here's her specific suggestion about how to make that our reality.
These policies will benefit consumers if they require that upfront stated prices must be all-inclusive. In other words, that all mandatory fees must be included in the total price and that the total price should be seen upfront. This is what academic research suggests will be most beneficial to consumers.
And here's the great news. Here's Senator Tom Tillis, the same Republican who submitted the bankers' perspectives for the record.
I can't imagine any reasonable member of Congress not saying, I want the person to know what their financial obligation is when they sign an instrument, not after they read page 10 in the fine print.
And to that end, there is a bill already written and introduced by Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut that would do pretty much what Tillis said he would support. And so S916 is the Junk Fee Prevention Act, and it would require companies to advertise total prices, including all mandatory fees, and require that companies refund fees when refunds are due. The bill's not perfect, though. It's full of loopholes. So, it allows corporations to charge early termination fees, but those fees just can't be, quote, excessive or unreasonable, unquote, which is way too subjective to be useful. And it also empowers the Federal Trade Commission to create regulations about disclosures and impositions of so-called excessive fees, which is, again, only loosely defined. But the Republicans probably won't go for the bill in total because, God forbid a corporation be prevented from ripping off a customer if they want to. But this is a start. There does seem to be some agreement about if there's going to be fees, we should know about them. And so even if we aren't voicing support for this imperfect bill, in the next year, our members of Congress are going to be touring our districts and kissing our asses and our babies for our votes. And so if we ask them to create a law requiring that all fees, mandatory and voluntary, because this pet fee thing is also bullshit, but those fees should be listed in our price estimations. And that seems to be something that both parties can support. But our voices are going to need to be used to make this happen. Because you heard Marsha Blackburn. She says no one in Tennessee is bitching to her about the corporate fees. You know, these people in Congress, they can't read our minds. They need to be told what we want them to do. They need to be told that deceptive fees are a problem in our lives and that we want Congress to, at the very least, force the corporations to be honest with us about how much we are going to owe them before we sign any contracts or give them any money. It's not an unfair demand. What's unfair is getting tricked into transferring our wealth to the shareholder class, because that's really what hidden fees are all about. Because when fees are deceptive, it really doesn't matter if you catch the fees or not. Because if you catch the fees, you know, in my case, it's probably because I've learned from experience, from getting tricked before, and know where to spot them. And I've developed a pen and paper method for conducting actual price comparisons. But it takes me hours of extra time to do all this research, and my time is valuable. My valuable productivity time, the time that could be spent working on my entrepreneurial business, is wasted in my hunts for hidden fees. And then if I don't catch the fees, I end up paying more than I intend to companies that exist to funnel money to shareholders. No matter what, sneaky fees cost you money. And that money extracted from you is transferred to the investor class, who are the ultimate beneficiaries of corporate profits. Hidden fees are a wealth transfer mechanism. And I'm not cool with transferring my hard-earned wealth to investors who are doing no work, who are performing no service in return for my money. Shareholders, investors, are simply people with enough money to be able to buy themselves into the profit extraction game. And if Congress were to at least mandate transparency in Congress speak, or in other words, if they were to require companies to show us all possible fees before any money is paid, that at least would give us an avenue for not getting screwed financially via time or actual money in the process of buying the services we need. And that would be better than the situation we're in now. And for the free marketeers who seem to think that all rules placed on businesses are bad, well, the companies would still be able to charge whatever they want. And so investors rejoice. You know, you can still charge me $3,853 for my tiny dog that doesn't shed to sleep on a pillow. You can still charge me $130 a month to park my car in a car-dependent city. But you would have to tell me about these fees before I show up to the hotel, before I pay a non-refundable $530 to run 2 credit checks. It seems like a reasonable compromise to me. If anything, the corporations still win. But it would be better than what we have now. And so how about we push for that? Because like I said, it's almost election year, baby. The only time when members of Congress bother to speak to us peasants. And so when they're speaking to us, how about we suggest to them that they make it mandatory for companies to show all possible fees before they get any of our money or we sign any kind of contracts? It's a practical and politically possible request. So this week, unfortunately, I do not have a new executive producer to announce. And if you're someone who is new to the Congressional Dish universe, we operate on the value for value business model here, which means that I produce episodes that are valuable for you upfront, and then you return whatever you think is fair in whatever financial form works for you. But once your contributions reach a cumulative $535, so it doesn't have to be all at once, but every time you hit $535, you're able to put your name as an executive producer on whatever episode you are most proud to have helped produce. And what that also does is that determines the rankings of our most valuable episodes of Congressional Dish, which is where I send everyone who is new to the podcast to find out which episodes they should start with, because the executive producers are telling you, quite literally with their money, what episodes are the most valuable of this podcast. And so since we don't have any new executive producers to announce today, let's take a quick look at what are the most valuable episodes of Congressional Dish. Because if you're almost at an executive producer credit, you can actually quite easily change this list with just one executive producer credit. So right now, the most valuable episode of Congressional Dish, there is a definite number one, is episode 266, Contriving January 6th. That is the episode where I watched all 20 plus hours of the January 6th committee and made a clip show, essentially, of the scheme that Donald Trump and his co-conspirators are currently being indicted for in the state of Georgia and by the feds. We have 5 executive producers on that one, and they are Christine Brendel, Daniel Slaughter, Shelley Straysoner, Michael Constantino, and Ben Barnett. Then in the number 2 spot, we have Congressional Dish 186, which is about the National Endowment for Democracy, which is such a crazy organization. It's funded by your tax dollars, but it looks private. It's staffed by Republicans and Democrats. It is bonkers that this thing exists. So much of what it does goes towards regime changing other countries. So yeah, that episode, I'm not surprised that that's still very high up on the list with 4 executive producers. One is anonymous, one is Garrick Smalley, one is Jared Ewert, and one is Brandon Lewis. So thank you to all of you. And then for the third most valuable episode of Congressional Dish, we have a tie. So we have 3 executive producers on Congressional Dish 218, Minerals Are the New Oil. And that episode really looks at how there is a global resource competition, really between us and China, for rare earth minerals, which are essential towards a green energy transition. And so the executive producers on that one are our coffee-infused nerd, David Deere and Robert Carpenter. Also tied for third is Congressional Dish 147, Controlling Puerto Rico, which is an episode about our history of controlling Puerto Rico. This one was produced back in the Obama administration when Congress, and Obama, because he signed it, created a fiscal control board in Puerto Rico, which has completely usurped the Puerto Rico government in terms of being able to decide what they do with their money for the people of the island. And all these years later, the Fiscal Control Board is still in charge. So that's still a very relevant episode. And that is executive produced by Ralph and Carolyn Rivera, Brandon Lewis, and Michael Gaines. And then finally, also tied for third, we have Congressional Dish 102, the World Trade Organization, Cool. And that episode was mind-blowing for me because that's when I really discovered the significance of the World Trade Organization in the global economy. And so that is the background of what the World Trade Organization is and how much influence our government has over it and what its function is in the world, which is essentially to make an economy, one economy for the entire world that in large part really serves multinational corporations. And so we have 3 executive producers on that, Stephen McMahon, Leslie Behan, and Michael Gaines. So that's the race for the top 3. But then we have 14 episodes that have 2 executive producers, and we have 41 episodes with 1 executive producer. And so if there is an episode that I haven't yet listed for you, an executive producer credit on there, especially if it's an episode that already has 2 executive producers, 1 executive producer credit could shoot it way up the list. And so, if anyone is looking for a credit, now would be a really good time to do that because there is a massive tie for which episodes are number 4 and 5 on our most valuable list. Okay. Before I wrap this up, I do want to let you know that I am feeling better. And right now I am on the road. I've been recording this episode from a hotel in Butte, Montana. And I've been on the road now. So I went from Mexico City to San Francisco to Campbell, California, which is just outside of San Jose, then down to Redondo Beach, then Denver, technically Aurora for Podcast Movement. Then we drove to Park City, Utah, and stayed in a fabulous hotel. You can listen to We're Not Wrong if you want to hear more about that. But yeah, I love that hotel so much. But now I'm in Butte, Montana for a family reunion where I could not be happier about the people that I'm going to be hanging out with this weekend. but Butte is not known for luxury resorts. So yeah, I'm in a La Quinta. And then after this, we go to Flathead Lake. And then I'm going to have 5 weeks still on the road before we get our apartment in Austin. And because of this, I'm very much in the digital nomad, mode. I've gotten so efficient with packing and unpacking and booking hotels and dealing with the billing and all of it. I'm just like in the zone. And so I think this is a really good time to do a Patreon Ask Me Anything about my digital nomad life. I promised you that I would do this, and I think this is the week. And then in the week in between this episode and the next one, I will answer all of your questions. And I will do that for the people that pay me, because this work that I've done on the road, I think there's a lot of value to this too. In fact, at Podcast Movement, there were a bunch of people that were encouraging me to do a podcast about how Joe and I live on the road, because what I was telling them is that our plan for Austin, because I will never stay in Austin year round. The summers, I've been getting excessive heat warnings for Austin, Texas constantly while I've been on the road, because I've kept my severe weather alerts just to see, does Austin get a ton of thunderstorms in the summer? Because maybe if they did, I would stay, but it doesn't. Instead, it gets excessive heat warnings and I just, nope, hard pass. And so what we're doing with our apartment is something that I call an apartment in a box, which is we're going to be renting our big furniture for the apartment. And then I will have a U-box with all of the stuff in it that makes, apartment life a home. So my towels, my sheets, my pillow, my art, my kitchen stuff, like it's all going in the box. And so I am more than happy to answer questions about that plan. And I'm more than happy to document that if that's something that you're interested in on the Patreon feed. I'm also happy to answer questions about traveling with my pet and the affordability of living in hotels. I'm happy to give the people who are supporting my work numbers and let you know how financially feasible this might be for you. But yeah, let's do our digital nomad episode. Ask me anything. And if you are interested in hearing that, all you have to do is sign up at whatever amount feels fair to you per main episode of Congressional Dish. You never get charged for the stuff that goes on behind the paywall. But right now I'm doing a maximum of 2 episodes per month. You get to set whatever amount feels fair for you per episode. There are people that only do $1 per episode, but like I said, the only amount that feels unfair to me is $0. So do $1 an episode. That said, though, we do suggest $5 an episode. And then we also have amazing souls that do like $25 an episode. Whatever you think is fair, feels fair to us. And that's how you get the Patreon feed. So yeah. Thank you to everyone who supports this podcast. And I have no idea what the next episode is going to be because Congress hasn't worked in 6 weeks. But I am going to go back through the hearing archive because while I was working on this episode, there were hearings that were happening in July. And so I'm going to update my hearing list. And there's always fascinating things. The only problem I have with Congressional Dish is that there are too many amazing, interesting hearings for me to possibly produce episodes about. So I have plenty of content. I'll have something for you. Until then, support the show, congressionaldish.com, and take care of yourselves. Have a happy Labor Day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite of any in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if
these bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.